So I wish I had a slightly better setup here. It's a little hard to maneuver through everything. I got like my mic just out of camera view, but my camera view is just kind of like really weird, and eventually I'll have to figure that out or whatever. But and then I got my keyboard all messed up. But anyways, I am in the middle of a design right now. Let me just refocus my keyboard. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of get back into was some of the ways that I used to really like to do my designs. I have had some sporadic formal training as far as like art goes, and while like I've been able to do things like portraitures and some slight realism and all that, that's just really kind of never where my passion has lied as far as like designing. I usually prefer like graphic. I usually prefer just weird, I guess you could say. Hopefully my mic is picking me up fairly well, even though I'm looking down like 80% of the time. Or I can try to like, I don't know if I'll be able to do this upwards or whatever, but anyways, so yeah, so kind of always just been drawn to these like weirder designs. These feel more true to me as an artist. It still kind of feels weird to say in any capacity, because either way, it's like I feel like it's generally assumed that you have to be like really good at art to like label yourself as an artist, right? But then I feel like, oh, that's also like very subjective. You can be true to yourself as an artist while still putting out something that isn't considered what you consider like old school masters style, like, you know, back in the day, like back in the day. But yeah, so this has always kind of rang true to, I feel like, my personality as an artist. And I feel like I've lost that to some extent. So I really want to like express that this year. I knew something was wrong with my glove. What the? So I really want to get back into that. Really get back into who I am as an artist, while still trying to like leave some room to be open to new ways of creating art, or new just trying new things in general. But I got to start somewhere, I feel like. So we will work with kind of what we got right here. So this is my sketch layer, and I usually like to try to make sure I label my layers, because as I start building them, they can get really messy. Even when I do label them, they get really messy, so I have to be very careful about that. Let's see, is that another layer? I'm sure plenty of other artists who are more familiar with Clip Studio, who also love Clip Studio as much as I do, will probably be like, what are you doing, dude? There's way more easier ways to do what you're doing and all this other stuff. I've been so inconsistent with this program that it really, and I just don't want to spend any more time necessarily watching tutorials. I feel like sometimes if I don't sometimes I prevent starting something because I'm like, well, I want to make sure that I can use the functionality of the program that I'm doing this on to like the fullest extent. But a long time ago, I always remember somebody who, I don't know, was being interviewed or something like that, who worked at Adobe and helped to make Adobe programs, was like, the people who make Adobe programs don't even know the full functionality of Adobe programs. So don't bog yourself down with knowing all the process, or knowing all the shortcuts, or knowing all the helpful hints and tools to to keep you from just getting in there and creating, right? And so bear with me as I don't know all the ways, shortcuts, and all that other stuff that I could probably achieve a much faster image. But either way, I have fun with it regardless. A lot of my work I feel like tends to be very graphic, so I always kind of stick with like bolder outlines and all that other stuff. Opacity, make sure I click back into outline. I can't remember how stabilization works. Is it like, no, that's too fast. Okay, I don't need too fast, I want more. So yeah, this just feels a little more true to me as an artist. The work feels more authentic in my opinion. I've always just had an affinity towards the other, kind of the weird, but not the weird in excess, but like, well, I don't know, maybe this may be excessive to others, but for me this felt kind of light, kind of playful, kind of just like not so serious. One of the other things that I've always suffered with as an artist is the like perfection aspect, that every line has to be perfect, every line has to be in the right place at the right time, kind of thing, like that kind of mentality. I'm really trying to like let that go, because it's just not going to be perfect. I can follow this as much as I want to, but at the end of the day, if the lines aren't even and the consistency between these little petals or whatever are not the same, I have to learn to be okay with that as well, because I think that's part of the character. But you know, obviously I'm speaking just for me. If you feel like it's crucial that a certain line is, because you'll see eventually I'll get to a point where I'm like, no, this line's too imperfect. Like, imperfect is okay, but I think there is such thing as like too imperfect, where you're like, okay, hold on, let me scale it back a little bit, let me readjust this line, because that's just not working out, right? So that's just me. Part of this whole thing that I'm really wanting to achieve with recording these drawings and all that is to create long-term content. I've always wanted to do some content creation. I don't feel like I have the personality to be like, what do they say, like super extroverted or anything like that, but at least not when a camera is recording. In the real world, it's a completely different story for me. Personality wise, I feel like I'm generally more outgoing in person than you would ever see me on camera. And then on top of that, it's like, in the real world, I definitely curse a lot more than I feel comfortable doing so on the internet, I suppose you could say, while doing something like drawing, right? Because I feel like drawing for me is more of a meditative, almost kind of task. And so if I'm here like cursing and kind of being super intense, then that might kind of defeat the purpose of what's happening here, right? Maybe this is a good way for people to like space out while I babble about anything and everything while I'm drawing. Maybe this is a good outlet for people to, just kind of not pay attention but still have something going on in the background. I don't know what people could possibly what value people could possibly find in this content. But one of the biggest things that I know that I want to like change for myself has been this like, really this is more or less to fulfill a need that I feel like I've been needing for a long time, in which I've always wanted to just create content and always being afraid to just post it. So this is more for me than anything else, because I've had that goal or that dream to just create content, not for any particular reason other than to just kind of be out there. I think there can be really good stuff out there as far as creation goes, or content creation goes. And so I think even if this never became anything, I would still feel happy about the just the fact that I like did the thing, right? Is that from something? I feel like do the thing. And so part of that, there is a philosophy that I would hear, especially even more so now and today, that's always been pretty relevant, has been just post. Fuck it. I mean, just post. Bleep it. Just do it. Just post. Who cares about? I'm sure there's people who that's like important to their livelihood, that they get interactions and stuff like that. But for me right now, that's not. It's more about just doing this new stuff, just exploring this new aspect of things. So this is obviously going to be like my first video, and for anybody who would happen to even stumble upon this video and actually watch this video, about a month ago I suffered from 2 strokes, and so that whole experience has kind of made me want to do these things, to like want to try new things, or like just kind of, you know, really start going after some of the things that I had initially set for myself years ago, as far as like, oh, I want to create content, or hey, I want to do more drawing, or hey, I want to get back into this. All these things that I said I wanted to do so many years ago, and just never did, because I felt like there were all of these barriers and all of these things in the way that prevented me from doing that. Especially the biggest thing being like, is my work quality enough, right? Am I creating something that people were gonna, you know, at this point it was like, fuck it, dude, because I mean, at this point I'm like, just gonna do for me at this point, because realistically I should, right? Realistically I should be able to just do this for me and have fun doing it, and not make it such a big thing for myself, right? Because I obviously make it a much bigger thing for myself than I do for anyone else, where I'm like, oh no, I'm not gonna put this out because I don't like the line, or I'm not gonna put this out because I think it's garbage, whatever that may be. But yeah, I had a stroke a couple months ago, and that's been a whole new thing to live and learn by. And you know, I'm very fortunate that it wasn't as extreme in some situations as it could be for others, where others unfortunately lose their lives from it, or their livelihoods completely unchanged. I know for some it's super impactful mentally, as well as physically. Some people just alters them in ways that that they just can't get back from. And that's not, that's nothing on them. That's a tough thing to have to deal with. I was fortunate that I didn't get the typical things that people typically think about when they think about somebody who's had a stroke, where it's usually physical deficit that occurs, right? Whether it's on one side of the body, there's obviously the facial change that happens. This was completely not that experience. I was still able to use full full portion of my body, my face. I didn't have any deficit in my face or anything like that. The only thing that only kind of gave me some idea that something wasn't right as far as my health went was that when I had the second stroke in the middle of the night, and I woke up and I went to the bathroom to because something just felt off. My whole left peripheral was gone. It just wasn't there. And it wasn't blacked out gone, or it wasn't blurry or anything. I don't think it wasn't physically an eye problem. It was a brain problem. So my brain just wasn't processing that whole left of my peripheral vision, and it was pretty scary. I had to ask my spouse to take me to the emergency room, where doctors ran some head scans and all this other stuff, and were you suffered what looks like 2 strokes. And they were did anything feel any which way? And I'm no, nothing felt different. As far as when I excuse me, when they initially occurred. So that first stroke that happened was just a dizzy spell. I got super dizzy, but I mean, there have been plenty of times in my life where I've gotten dizzy and I didn't think anything of it, so why would this time be any different for me, is what I thought when it happened. I was okay, well, I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna rest a minute, and then all of a sudden because then the next day I was fine for the entirety of the day, and then after that it was I was normal for that day. The following day after, and then the day after that, in the middle of the night, is when that second stroke happened, and they were and that's when I was I need to go to the hospital because this is not okay. So very scary either way, but I think I had a much more fortunate outcome than a lot of other people who go through the similar experience. The only thing that the doctors were generally concerned about was because of my age. I'm not in what they would have discerned as an age that shows high levels of stroke. And so that was their only thing that they felt what's going on here. And so so there's that was the one thing was so because they ran a bunch of tests and they said that they don't know what caused it. They don't know what caused the strokes to happen. And so we still don't quite know why they happened, but all we know at this point is that it's it's about preventing it now more than anything, right? A reoccurrence of this situation. So I've definitely leaned into changing my diet and exercising and all that good stuff. I say it mockingly, but it's all been very good, and I've even lost like probably like 10, 11, 12 pounds maybe in doing so, right? And again, it's not like there's nothing like drastic about it, but I feel like personally it's made a world of difference, right? My clothes fit a little bit better. I feel like my posture's a little bit better, right? Because I feel like I can stand tall now, as opposed to always being self-conscious in my body as far as like being overweight and all that other stuff. But it kind of like took this, unfortunately, to like make me want to do something about it, right? Because I always complained about being overweight, and oftentimes I joke about being overweight. And I mean, it's whatever, right? It's a coping mechanism, I guess you could say. But I never really took doing anything seriously about it until this happened. And then this happened, and I was like, I probably should take this a little bit more seriously, right? You have those like tough love doctors who are like, if you don't do anything, you're gonna have a much worse situation in the future, or even sooner than that, right? And I intend to be here for a fairly long time, if I have anything to do with it. So yeah, I mean, that's how I feel about the whole situation. And it's only recently that I've really been able to like talk about it in such a meaningful way with people. Because normally, and I understand, right? I understand that like people want the best, and people just want to make sure that they are making themselves like available to you, as far as like, oh my god, are you okay, and please reach out if you need anything, and all this other stuff, right? And I'm not complaining about that. I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing or anything like that, but part of dealing with the like emotional degradation of like going through a stroke, kind of for me, was that like everything was becoming about the stroke almost, right? And so that was starting to like bother me in some instances. Like the stroke all of a sudden became my life, and it just really wasn't. And so I had to share that. Like I have to share that with people, because it's real easy for them to be like, I would say, for example, slur a word, right? Because I was speaking too fast, and people around me would be like, it's because you're having, are you I joke around about it, and I say I'm stroking out on some like things. It's kind of messed up, right? Like I don't know what would be the best example of which I've used that. Because I would say in some cases, yeah, the stroke kind of has affected me, right? Like anything. But there'll be like sometimes where I'll get like tongue tied or tongue twisted or whatever, and I'd be like, I wouldn't be able to like correct myself unless I completely stopped and then like slowly said it, which people do all the time regardless of stroke. But then I would joke and be like, sorry, I'm stroking out. And so obviously I have to like be better about saying that, because it's not that funny. But I would get tongue tied, or I would knock something over, drop something, misspell a word, anything like that, and it would be like, are you okay? Are you having a stroke? Are you like, is this because of the stroke? Or like, and people would just get scared around me for me, because they're like, something's wrong. And it's like, no, I've misspelled words long before I've had a stroke, or um I've have gotten tongue twisted before having a stroke, and I've dropped things before having a stroke. And so, for me at least, and maybe it's a privilege that I have, right? Because maybe for others who have suffered more severe forms of stroke have, it really is part of that. But I don't know if I would go as far as making it like the only part of like who I am as a person, right? Because after all that happened, it almost felt like that everything after it was connected to that in some way, and it was starting to bother me, because I was like, I'm not just that. And everything that I'm going through right now, all of my successes or all my failures, whatever those may be, like, are not tied to that, like, at all, right? They may have been impacted in some way because of it, or I may have found some motivation because of it, or whatever. But ultimately, at some point, I'm the one who puts in that work, or I'm the one who like made that mistake, whatever it may be. And it doesn't have to be the whole like, oh, you had a stroke thing. And so that was something that I had to like deal with, I think, emotionally, because it was starting to create a big level of self-doubt for me, in everything that I was starting to do or want to do, and I felt like I couldn't do, because I was like, are people just going to equate it to my stroke, or is it just going to, I just had so many kind of hang-ups around that, and so I just didn't want to, so it was just kind of getting me down for a minute, because I didn't want that to be part of my identity. Honestly, if it were up to me, I probably wouldn't even have ever talked about it, but I think there is some, obviously some healing factor in that. Are there some healing qualities in, I don't know if I like those eyes, in talking about things sometimes, right? When you're ready to talk about them. If you're not ever ready to talk about them, then so be it. But I do think that there are some aspects of that are beneficial, but only when you're ready. So this was me being ready to talk about it, essentially, because I don't know, about a month ago I wouldn't have. I mean, a month ago when it happened, or like about a month and a half ago when it happened, when we went to the hospital and all that, my spouse was like, let me call your sister, let me call your mom, let me call and I was like, no, don't call anybody, dude. Like, don't, that's fine. I don't want anybody to know right now. I just didn't want to worry anyone. And it's obviously a silly thing looking back at it, right? That's obviously a silly thing to like say or not. And obviously my spouse is more emotionally mature than I am to be like, well, I'm going to call them anyways because you're in no condition to say otherwise, right? You're like, you don't even have your phone right now, so it's going to stop me, kind of thing. And so, at the end of the day, I was, very glad to have that support system, and to have those people come in and talk to me about, or just to come and see and talk to me and show their support for what I was going through. I think it played a big role in my recovery, to be honest, and to have somebody as caring and committed as my spouse is to what we've built together, and what we're continuing to build together, is just kind of means the world to me as well. So I'm very fortunate, and I'm very lucky, to be honest, that all of this wasn't worse, and I'm very fortunate to have a support system and to have so many people on my side who have just kind of given me a new perspective as far as like being able to talk about things, because in the past I don't think that would have really ever been the case, which, you know, it is what it is. So I'm making some progress in this design, and I'm not crazy about it. I there's something kind of cute about it, but there's also something kind of I just don't like about it either. Am I doing this right? I think I am. And but I'm gonna commit. I'm gonna commit to this design because I think it's important that I do. Just for the sake of what we're talking about here, as far as something not being perfect, and about just like getting it out there. Definitely don't like that. And not being so worried or focused on the overall look, because sometimes it's such small details and you don't really need to put so much weight on some of these smaller details. Now, if these smaller details were like, I guess it just matter of what it is for your design and all that other stuff, but I don't feel like some of these small details, like having imperfect arms on this character, are really going to take away from the image as a whole to be like garbage. And even if it was considered garbage, well, that's okay, because it's my design anyways. And this is all for getting into creating long form content that I can break up into short form content. So part of the goal with this, right, is in terms of long form content is just creating something. So my page handle, right, is BearlyASMRtist, and the whole thing behind that was because the joke was that I don't agree with this by any means, right? But in the past, a number of people have told me that I have the kind of voice that would be good for ASMR. I don't know. And so I've always thought it was kind of funny that people would tell me that. And so a buddy of mine was like, you should do a page that's like barely ASMR, but like, because you're also like, because at the time I was like, well, I'm barely an artist, you know, like, because we would talk about art, me and one of my, he's like a brother to me, but like one of my closest buds. We would talk about art, and I would always joke that I'm barely an artist in comparison to him, right? And then he was like, you're missing a big opportunity here to have a ASMR page or something similar to it where you make art as well, and it's like barely, and it's supposed to be like barely an artist, barely an ASMRtist type thing, which I was like, you're right, that is clever. So I ended up making it, and then like for years again, like had never done anything with it. And so so that's kind of the goal with wanting to make like long form content through this, where I can take my time making designs, And then maybe going back and editing some of the sillier parts for short term. Again, I don't think necessarily for ASMR purposes, because I don't agree that I have a voice for ASMR, let alone do I think I have the capacity for like whispering. Whisper, 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 whisper. I mean, maybe, but I don't think people want to hear that. I don't think I fit into any kind of category. I just don't see that happening. So anyways, but I do think that it's just good for kind of like background noise, if that were to be a thing for people, as well as kind of just helping me with my thoughts, and for kind of helping me. Sometimes I feel like I can focus on a design when I can talk through some of the things that I'm thinking about with the design. But there's this thing's like all over the place. If you think about it, right? Let's look at this collectively. Um, this kind of doesn't make sense with this like moon and this character, and there's just like nothing that is like cohesively tying it all together. This frame is kind of weird and wonky. I don't know, but it starts here, right? It starts here. It starts with thinking about those things. How is the frame impacting the structure of the work that I'm trying to create? Um, what kind of questions can we start asking about this? What kind of stories can we start creating, right? I also like to write, and so I also like want to start creating stories. And that's another portion of the like of this that I want to do. While I'm drawing, I would like to share stories, and talk about the things that I think are interesting as far as like concepts that I would like to write about, or even use that in like help flesh out ideas for short stories through the art as well. And even like create these small brief stories that I could use as far as like short-term content as well, because right now my short-term content is like just quick like time-lapse videos of like some of my other artwork that I've done, that I like would set up this whole like overhead thing, and it's cool, it looks nice, but there's nothing. I feel like it's lacking something substantial, and I feel like storytelling is part of that. I feel like that's the thing that it's missing. So I definitely want to get more into that. I definitely want to like um, start building that up, right? Where, sorry if you hear the little cars, like I'm on a corner street, and it's like a big main road, so like the cars that come through here, they come hauling. Um, but yeah, um, that's just part of like this overall goal, is to like have some long-term content where I can really share these long stories, and not just stories that like I make, but like stories about things that I've experienced that I think are kind of funny. I mean, I laugh at them now, and in the moment they weren't so funny. Um, but I think that's also part of like the idea process, right? We build on our own experiences and things like that. So I think that's part of the idea, where for me at least, right? Because this is for me, but I'm making an effort to like share that as well, um, to like brainstorm and to find structure, and to develop characters that have already existed in my life in one capacity or another, and then really just push out that story in long form content, and then find like these nuggets of those, like just these small nuggets of those stories where, I don't know if you could hear that engine roaring, but that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about all the time. um but then yeah, find that nugget within the bigger content, and share that time lapse, but with the story tied to the image that I'm working on, right? So this is actually, I know I just talked about how there's like nothing about this that's making any sense, but this is also very, um, this is also connected to a story that I'm currently working on, a short story of, I guess you call it non-fictional story, right? Because it's something I've experienced, but having this image tied to it in a very fictional way, right? Um, and so, anyways, I have to work on saying and a lot because I feel like I say it all the time. But I'm gonna stop here for today because I'm gonna start doing something else. But stay tuned for part 2. This, I think, is we can start where I'll start working on like colors. And I think when I start working on colors on this particular design, I will share the kind of long version of this story, as or the story that's influencing this image, right? So I really hope that if you happen to come across this and you happen to get this far, that excuse me, that you tune in for the second part of this where I elaborate on the story and why I think this image ties to that story very well, even though this kind of looks like a mess in terms of like what's going on. Um, but if you did like this, perchance, um, please give it a like. Please give the channel. Is that what I say? Please give the channel a subscribe. What did I say? Click the little buttons and notifications and all that other stuff. Maybe even leave a comment. Um, but until then, I'll hopefully see you next time. Wait, where is it? There we go. Bye. Where's my mouse? Oh, there it is.